From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
Lesson from Tiananmen. Where will Bangladesh go? If we pay attention to political news in Bangladesh, we can see these images. Thousands of young faces, they are students, but it's truly chaotic. They stormed the Prime Minister's residence, some carried furniture outside. They rampaged everywhere, toppled the statue of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh, who is likened to Mahatma Gandhi of India and Sun Yat-sen of China. They blocked all traffic and caused congestion, some sprayed paint on vehicles. They broke into prisons and released hundreds of prisoners. And the consequences are obvious. Thousands died, including students, workers, and the poor who participated. And most recently, the conflict between supporters of Sheikh Hasina and non-supporters has reignited. An endless spiral of chaos. Essay lesson from Tiananmen? Let. Looking at the current situation, Bangladesh is truly chaotic, with economic decline and national jealousy. Going back to when Bangladesh gained independence in 1971, this country was once one of the poorest in the world. Even former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger considered it an economic basket case. But under her leadership, times have changed. Since 2009, Bangladesh has achieved an average growth rate of over 6% per year. Poverty in the country has also sharply decreased, and over 95% of its 170 million people now have access to electricity. By 2021, Bangladesh witnessed an impressive milestone when its per capita income surpassed India's, reaching $2,457.92. Besides the economy, Hasina is also praised for cracking down on Islamist militant groups. After the 2016 incident where 5 Bangladeshi extremists attacked a popular Western cafe in Dhaka and killed 22 people. With so many achievements, why then did the people and students rise up in such fierce protests? The origin of the student protests stems from injustices in job allocation. Initially, students demanded the abolition of the quota system that reserves 30% of government jobs for families of those who fought for independence from Pakistan in 1971. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. To understand the root cause, we need to go back in time to her tough policies. Export sector, specifically the garment industry, which accounts for 90% of the country. Bangladesh has surpassed Vietnam to become the second largest garment manufacturer, only behind China. Under the pressure of global political changes, especially the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic, the country's economy faces serious challenges. Major trading partners like the UK and Japan, affected by economic downturns, have significantly reduced orders, leading to a series of internal economic problems. Inflation soared to 11% annually, the local currency depreciated by 40% against the USD, and foreign exchange reserves plummeted. Prices of goods, especially fuel and food, skyrocketed, causing major hardships for people's lives. Many fell into hardship, even poverty, many businesses went bankrupt, factories closed, and unemployment rates rose immeasurably. It is estimated that nearly 32 million Bangladeshi youth are unemployed or even uneducated. Amid these circumstances, the Bangladeshi government introduced a controversial policy as mentioned above. Specifically, Bangladesh allocated over half of annual recruitment quotas to privileged groups like children of freedom fighters. This policy was established by Prime Minister Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the first president of Bangladesh and father of the republic. The preferential treatment for descendants of freedom fighters not only angered the protesters, but also pushed the peaceful protests to the brink of chaos. The clash on August 27 led to 100 deaths and 10,000 arrests. However, they succeeded in reversing the national policy flow, though at the cost of blood and tears. They succeeded in getting the Bangladeshi Supreme Court to overturn the High Court's ruling, declaring that 93% of civil service quotas should be based on merit, with only 5% for free and prior families and the remaining 2% for underdeveloped regions. Along with that, the ruling reinstated internet and relaxed the curfew order. It seemed the protests would subside, but no, the fire of dissent in Bangladesh burned even fiercer when this man, Muhammad Yunus, the interim government leader, unexpectedly emerged. But his sharp criticisms from the opposition, like oil on fire, further ignited public anger. Faced with a rising wave of protests, Hasina's administration chose to respond with a tough stance. Hasina viewed the protests as a rebellion that must be crushed at all costs. Her firm statements acted as a rallying cry for more people to take to the streets. Thus, it served as a catalyst, making the protest waves swirl even more violently. And by the time the mistake was realized, it was too late. Ms. Hasina had to step down to negotiate with the student leader, but it was unsuccessful. And finally, on August 4th, when the military declared it would not intervene in support of Prime Minister Hasina and the army generals no longer prevented the student march toward the capital, Hasina had only 45 short minutes left to leave the country. However, that is not all. S supporters have risen against Hasina. On the afternoon of August 10th, a riot broke out in Geopolitics city, resulting in the deaths of 2 soldiers and injuries to 4 soldiers, 20 protesters killed, and the military vehicle set on fire. S supporters formed a human barricade blocking the road to the Bagahambu Bridge, which had previously been burned and vandalized by a crowd shortly after Hasina. There were no police present in the area, yet the resisting crowd, armed with sticks, pipes, bricks, and other objects, attacked those they believed to be supporters of the woman during the gathering. The protests have been and are continuing with no end in sight. In the actual history of the nation, images of students rising up and carrying out protests are not uncommon. Specifically, the Tiananmen event as I mentioned above. Both protests stemmed from the people's desire for a more democratic society with greater freedoms. The people of Tiananmen wanted to end the dictatorship and political reform, while the people of Palestine also have similar demands for democracy and reform. For those who don't know yet, let me briefly go over it. Looking back through the annals of history, this event originated from a Chinese professor. After returning from the West, he embarked on a personal tour of Chinese universities, delivering speeches on freedom, human rights, and the separation of powers. He believes that China's poverty and underdevelopment are a direct result of its unique political system and rigid command economy. To achieve development, reforms are necessary. The view that political reform is the optimal solution to China's persistent problems rapidly spread among students, especially after his speeches were widely shared. Therefore, protests took place. Initially, these protests were small and scattered, so they were quickly arrested. Meanwhile, General Secretary Hu Yudang was blamed by the government system for being too soft and was harshly criticized. This led to his forced resignation as General Secretary on January 16, 1987. However, his sudden departure shortly thereafter was the final straw. At this moment, the students all believe that his sudden departure is related to his previous actions. Therefore, a large number of students from various schools gathered once again. They marched to Tiananmen Square, not only to commemorate him, but also to express their profound indignation. It requires a series of reforms towards democracy, such as making the anti-corruption process transparent, press freedom, and strong investment in education. This time, the protests have become with a number of up to 100,000 people, including students and intellectual groups. At that time, this man, Tru Shuyang, the General Secretary, when facing a series of protests, he desires a peaceful dialogue solution. However, contrary to him, Prime Minister Li Peng wanted to suppress and did not accept any demands, despite much opposition. But the god is the one who holds the top deputy position of the country, so he summoned Best Wong according to his own policy. In his speech to the protesters, he said that their concern about anti-corruption is completely legitimate and that the nature of the student movement is patriotic. In addition, he also called on students Please return to join hands with the government in building the country. Many students, upon hearing this, were satisfied and decided to return. However, there were still a few more stubborn elements who stayed and continued to protest. They believed that what the authorities had offered was still not enough. And at this critical moment, after 3 decades of tense confrontation, the Soviet-Chinese summit was held at Tiananmen. A historic event with the participation of journalists from all over the world. Recognizing this as a golden opportunity, students rushed to protest to pressure the government into making concessions. Otherwise, the conference would not be able to take place. However, they did not realize that on the side of the Chinese government, there was Deng Xiaoping, a man who held supreme power. Instead of conceding, he organized a welcoming ceremony for the diplomatic delegation right at the airport. In this age, China's image became embarrassed on the internet, and in response to the action of the protest invitations, the authorities were determined to punish what they had done. To crush the protests, the authorities imposed martial law and mobilized the military to suppress them. Despite fierce opposition from General Secretary Wang Wang, Zhang Ziran, Crown Prince Li Peng remained determined to carry out a bloody crackdown. In May 1989, tanks and troops poured into the streets. And then, what was bound to happen, happened. Clashes broke out between protesters and the military. The protesters used weapons and homemade bombs that blocked roads and fiercely resist. Some soldiers were beaten to death, and their bodies were hung by the road as a gruesome warning. In response, the military did not hesitate to use violence, beating and firing upon people in the streets. Even many people standing on apartment buildings were injured. The climax of the event occurred in the early morning of June 4, 1989, when, according to the government's sinister plan, Tiananmen Square had to be cleared before 6 a.m. And indeed, it happened. From midnight, tanks, armored vehicles, soldiers with machine guns, and plastic-clad troops were deployed. From midnight, tanks, armored vehicles, soldiers with machine guns, and disheveled troops were deployed into the square. There is no clear evidence of what actually happened, only that all the lights at Tiananmen were turned off. And when the clock struck 6 a.m., the square no longer held a single trace of the procession or the protest. There are reports that the military opened fire and even used the armored vehicles to run over protesters. However, other sources say no gunshots were fired. Yet regardless, this protest is losing momentum after more than a month. Returning to Bangladesh, this protest shows no signs of ending and is intensifying. Although it hasn't descended into civil war, it is already emerging. Because it emerged with coffee. Because coffee emerged pursuing its own ideals. And these coffees have taken actions, provoked, and even exerted physical influence on each other. The question here is, if we had taken drastic measures like China, would this incident have ended right from the start? The answer cannot be certain. It depends on the potential leadership seats within the protesting individuals. S approach has been successful. And there are also many opinions that, ideally, if done that way, the country. So if the situation continues like this, where will this country go? In a positive scenario, someone might step up to take power, using strong measures to control the protesters. Otherwise, the country will fall into another negative scenario. Look at Libya, a country that was once very prosperous, but after the 2011 protests demanding democracy, it is now just a pile of ruins. Terrorism and violence appear everywhere. Political forces, extremist factions and ethnic communities continue to clash endlessly. The economy has fallen into a bottomless pit, leading to illegal migration. Libya is struggling to survive, let alone recover, along with countless other unsolvable problems. From this, you can see that although protests differ in scale, their reasons are quite similar. They are color revolutions. To learn more, let's watch another video. Setting aside countries far from Vietnam, recently we should pay more attention to Cambodia. This neighbor is showing signs of tension. Cambodia's Ministry of Defense said some opposition figures abroad have attempted to incite protests against the capital Phnom Penh. The situation remains peaceful for now, but armed forces have been alerted to prevent any chaos. Law enforcement agencies have clear evidence of plans to incite domestic protests related to a conspiracy to carry out a color revolution to overthrow Cambodia's legitimate royal government. The president of Cambodia's National Assembly also emphasized that subversive groups have spread misinformation, incited unrest, and plan to establish an illegal government to overthrow the royal government. Thus, it can be seen that color revolutions are gradually spreading to Southeast Asian countries. The question is Vietnam being affected? Provisional National Government of Vietnam. He lured gullible people by organizing referendum campaigns, drawing up projects and promising to grab land and build houses to exploit their greed. In 2016, under the guise of environmental protection after the Formosa Sea incident, subjects incited mass gatherings with violent and illegal behavior, hiding behind the movement against Formosa Ha Tin Company. Color. Thus, it can be seen that color revolutions are truly terrifying, leaving huge scars on any country they pass through. What about you? What do you think about color revolutions? Please leave comments below to let Did know. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you again.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.